Good morning, and delighted to be in conversation with Dr. Shashi Tharoor on his latest book, A Wonderland of Words, Around the Word in 101 Essays. A charming, entertaining book. We'll speak about it. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, a friend of words and no stranger to packed halls. Welcome to the Hindu Lit for Life 2025.
Thank you. I think it's the people of Chennai, you're all readers, that's why you come, but it's wonderful to see you all.
So let's begin. In the introduction section of the book, you write, I'm besotted with words. It's fair to say I love them. What does that mean, and how did this book come about?
Oh, what it means is literally what it says. I just love words. I just love hearing them, playing with them, remembering them, using them. I mean, you know, it's either there's something about, you know, it's like there are people, for example, who resonate to music, and they hear a tune, a melody, a snatch of something, and it just stays with them. I'm a bit like that with words. So, I mean, words just happen, in my case, to strike me off the printed page. In fact, it's fairly rare for me to hear a word and I want to try and get it. I mean, it's more by reading that I became in love with words. And frankly, there was also a sort of a much more banal reason. I was a childhood asthmatic. And sort of at the age of 2.5, when I had been born in London, my parents were there, then they moved over to India, and I immediately developed very, very acute asthma. And those were the days before bronchodilators and nebulizers and inhalers and all those things. Or you were given these very strong tablets that forced your lungs open and they made your heart go thud, thud, thud. And essentially, you couldn't lie down because you couldn't choke on your own, you know, lack of air. So basically, I was sitting up in bed very often the entire day, entire night. Big eyes, no TV in India in those days, no obviously Nintendo or PlayStation or laptops or mobile phones or any other distractions. All I could do was read. And so from a very young age, reading became my escape, became my entertainment, became my education. And by reading, I acquired words. That's really the answer to your question. I didn't sit around mugging up dictionaries as some people unfortunately seem to be encouraged to do. Don't do it. Just read. The more you read, the more you'll find that, you know, you come across the same word in 3 different places, you'll get the nuance, you'll get the meaning, you'll get how you use it. And that's how you fall in love with it.
And how did this book come about?
This one, actually, there was, again, a rather banal history to it. You know, you remember all the whole history of how I became a bit of a joke here by using a silly word in a tweet. It wasn't a silly word. It's a word I'd used going back to my college debating days. There was this rather irresponsible so-called journalist. I don't really consider him one because it's just one of these persons who seems to use the medium to put across a point of view, and usually rather poorly grounded point of view. That's my bias is showing. But when he'd done a really nasty sort of show full of concoctions and lies, I said the show was a farrago of lies, misrepresentations, and distortions, misrepresentations and outright lies broadcast by an unprincipled showman masquerading as a journalist. That was my entire tweet.
And that had people scurrying to the dictionary.
Exactly. I mean, there was a mystified tweet by the Oxford English Dictionary saying, why are 1 million people suddenly looking up the word farrago? And they were pretty much all in India, as you can imagine. And the strange thing is that I didn't realize when I used it that it was not a word in common use or circulation, because it certainly was when I was at St. Stephen's College and using it in debates about my opponent's arguments. You know, there's a farrago of this and that or whatever. So anyway, so then with that I became India's Mr. Difficult Words, and that became a bit of a reputation, and there were jokes about it and memes and cartoons and all that. And I had you either basically get sulky and sort of go into your shell and try and only use 2-syllable words, or you basically take this on, embrace the caricature, and make a joke out of it, which I did, and I played along with that. And so, anyway, at the end of the day, I rather enjoyed some of the jokes, didn't find some of them funny. The worst ones are every Diwali and New Year and so on. There'll be some gibberish sent around, people saying, Shashi Tharoor sent me a greeting. And honestly, it's just insane collection of convoluted words which don't actually mean anything, and that somebody makes up and attributes to me, which I don't particularly enjoy. But there are some fairly clever ones as well. The one that I think I mentioned in the book even because it stuck in my head as a funny one was, I used to think I was poor, then I met Shashi Tharoor and realized I was impecunious, which I actually don't say these things, but I still thought it was funny. And then there's a newspaper in Dubai that's read mainly by the Indian population there called the Khaleej Times. And they wrote to me saying, would you do a column every week on words? And I don't know why in an idle moment I thought, why not? Chalo, I do have, there's an awful lot of Malayali voters living in the Gulf, so there's a good reason to reach them as well. And so I wrote this column. I did, I don't know, more than 100, but I mean, it was something one could carry off for a couple of years. And there was, at some point, one begins to run out of steam, and the paper also feels they've done their thing. So we parted amicably. But in the meantime, I had these columns, which I used to tweet whenever I remembered to, once a week or thereabouts. And somebody said, why not try and make a book out of it? Some people were saying that they used to try and find the magazine's weekend section and tear out the thing, and so it was all complicated. Why don't I do better? Why don't I take these columns and try and expand them where appropriate, add to them, deepen them, and write a few new essays so the book itself will hang together better. And I must say I was blessed with my sort of wonderful publisher, David Davidar at Aleph, who enjoys words himself. I think he's somewhere in the audience. There he is, right in front. And David worked with me on how to make this interesting. So he did insist there should be an introductory essay, and he did insist there should be a concluding essay, which particularly took into account some of the new language, modifications that are emerging, these various new words that each generation comes up with. But as I pointed out, it's not a very surprising thing. Every generation comes up with a vocabulary that the previous one thinks is silly. And it was certainly true in my time when people in the 60s and 70s were saying things like hip and cool and groovy and so on. And the older people thought this is so silly. Today, the younger people think that's so absurdly old-fashioned. What does all this mean? I mean, so this is going to go on. And whatever the millennials are saying now will be sneered at by the beta, and what the beta is saying now will probably be sneered at by the theta and so on. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that with David and me chatting this through, we shaped the book into something which we thought would both be a fun read and so also instructive. And as the cover, which I'm rather fond of, it's a rather good cover, points out, you've got a book being read by a father and a daughter at the same time, and one talking about it to the other. And the idea is very much that this should appeal to readers at different levels. Both the adult reader who perhaps knows much of all this and is just reading it for fun, and it's meant to be funny and enjoyable and witty, and there's lots of humor on pretty much every page. And at the same time, it's also meant to be a bit instructive because it tells you a few things about language and how to use it and how not to use it that might stand some younger readers in good stead.
It's a fantastic read, and the thing I like about it is I don't think you need to read it sequentially.
Yeah, that's right.
Bits and parts, but you could pick
it up anyway. I mean, it's 101 essays. In fact, strictly speaking, it's more than 101 because there's also the introduction and the conclusion. But the fact is that it's also, it's meant to be dipped into. It's I don't know, there must be some people here who believe in leaving a book in the bathroom. But they can do this with that as well. Pick it up when they're there for extended sessions.
Again, in the introduction, you mentioned in reference to your father, and I quote, "My enthusiastic approaches to life and learning are inherited from him. So is my work ethic and love for words." Could you speak a bit about how your father influenced your love towards words?
Yeah, he was just an amazing, amazing man. He grew up in a village in Kerala, and you can imagine the quality of the English you were taught, especially in those days. And then his elder brother, who'd done rather well and was living in England, took him and his younger brothers to England. So here's this 19-year-old Malayali kid arriving in England thinking he studied some English, but in fact, totally out of his depth. And he essentially relearns the language from scratch. Self-taught, because he was, I've seen notebooks of his covered with quotations from Byron and passages of Dickens and Shakespeare. And he just read and fell in love with the language from there. And because of that, and because he loved words, he also enjoyed things like word games. He was a Scrabble addict. When he moved back to India, when I was just 2 years and a bit old, to Mumbai. No one knew Scrabble yet. It was not a popular, not even known. And he brought his set with him, and he managed to find a few other England-returned expatriates to set up a weekend Scrabble group, that sort of thing. And then as my sisters and I were growing up, he injected into us his love of words. So he would set us little challenges. Again, remember, this was the pre-television age, so keeping your children occupied is always a responsibility of every parent. So he would, write a 9 or 10-letter word on the top of a piece of paper, and we'd have to form 4-letter words or more out of them. And my sisters being younger than me, they were allowed 3-letter words and more, and whoever got the most would be rewarded and so on. And we did this frequently throughout our childhood. He would do other things, give you a jumble of letters and ask you to form the longest possible word out of them, that kind of thing. So the words were there. And then once on car journeys, he invented a precursor of what we today know as Wordle. That is, that he would imagine a 5-letter word in his head and ask us to guess it. And he would only tell us, unlike Wordle, which at least tells you which letter you've got in the right place, which letter you've got in the wrong place. He would just tell us how many we got right. So you would literally have to go through, and he gave us 20 guesses. Wordle gives you only 6, but Wordle does give you more clues. And it was a terrific sort of thing. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that if you care about words, you enjoy playing with words, he was a terrific father to have, because he's infectious, but he was also somebody with a great zeal for life, a type A++ kind of personality. So all of that kind of, my instinct as a kid was to curl up in a corner with a book and ignore the world. And he kind of shook me out of that too and made me a little more active and articulate and all the other stuff that seems have been identified with me in recent years.
I mean,
so I owe him a lot.
So you credit him with your work ethic. My question is, does Dr. Shashi Tharoor have a word ethic in addition to work ethic? Yeah. And if yes, what does your word ethic look like?
Okay, well, the work ethic is certainly, as I said, derived from my father's appetite for work, and I've had that. I work long hours. I don't sleep enough, largely because I've consistently tried to do 2 professions at the same time, both when I was at the UN and when I was in Indian politics. I've tried to spend whatever time I could squeeze out of the day writing, and that's been important to me. So that's the work ethic. On the word ethic, it's very simple. I'd say just use words correctly. I'm very, very open to the inventive possibilities of language. And I certainly love it when kids start playing with words they've just discovered and joking and punning. I don't think the pun is the lowest form of humor. I think it's one of the first and best forms of humor, because it involves, falling in love with a word and exploring its possibilities in different ways. And the thing is that, for me, the only thing I object to, and by the way, I don't even mind, I've got a whole chapter on Indianisms, and some of you may be surprised, I actually do not object to some of the things that grammarians will tell you, strictly speaking, is wrong, because as long as the meaning is clear, my word ethic says you can use it. So if somebody in India writes to a Westerner, I'll revert to you in a few days, they're mystified, because they understand revert to mean, you will turn into what I used to be. I will revert to you. No, you're not going to turn into him or her. All you're saying is you'll get back to him. But it's so obvious that that's what you mean, I don't see why that couldn't be just listed as acceptable Indian usage. But where something is clearly inaccurate usage, that's where my ethic draws the line. One of the most irritating things in India is when people use the word until to mean as long as. It does not mean as long as. You can't tell people, I'll miss you until you're gone. No, I'll miss you until you're back. But everyone in India uses it the wrong, not everyone, but a heck of a lot of people in India use it the wrong way. And I come across it all the time, even in people who otherwise write or speak well. So that's the sort of thing I say, no, I don't go around correcting people's English, as some of the WhatsApp forwards imply. I'm not like that. But this I would be willing to correct. No, you don't miss me until I'm gone.
So the first section of your book, titled Borrowed Plumes, is instructive and showcases the inclusive nature of the English language. May I please ask you to share the origin stories of a couple of phrases that I was fascinated with?
Okay.
One being the whole 9 yards,
okay.
And the second being a shot of whiskey.
So those are both American expressions. I've got a thing on American and British English, another one on words that Americans use that perhaps, we've read or come across for so long that we may even use it without really understanding where it comes from. And those are two expressions that Navaneeth asked about that are there, that are entirely from American usage. The whole 9 yards is very common American usage, so somebody says, are you really going to eat that whole sundae, ice cream and cream and fruit and everything? Yeah, the whole 9 yards. What is the 9 yards? That's not, or so-and-so bought this, this huge property, the whole 9 yards, and it's actually much more than 9 yards, so why the whole 9 yards? The reason is, the expression started during World War II, because in American planes, the machine gun cartridges, when you're firing from the war aircraft, had belts of bullets, and you kept on firing until the belts ran out. Now, the belts were 27 feet or 9 yards long. And therefore, as you kept on firing, if you used up the whole 9 yards, you had no bullets left. And that's where the expression, the whole 9 yards, came from, in America. And of course, when Americans use something often enough, it spreads around the world, and that's where that expression came. A shot of whiskey is even older. A shot of whiskey was because in the Wild West, where everyone carried 6 guns, as they were called, which could take 6 bullets, a .45 cartridge, if those of you who've been reading cowboy novels will know, each bullet, each .45 bullet cost 12 cents. So that was a shot. But it so happened by happy coincidence that in the Wild West in those days, a little peg of whiskey, a shot of whiskey, a drink of whiskey also cost 12 cents. So sometimes an impecunious cowboy would go into a bar, slightly low on the cash, but he'd have a bullet to spare, so he'd hand over the bullet and say, can I have a shot's worth of whiskey? So you give the 12 cents worth of the cartridge, and you get 12 cents worth of whiskey back, and that's how the expression, a shot of whiskey, happened. Now, of course, it no longer costs 12 cents for either the whiskey or the bullet, but you can go around to an American bar and ask for a shot of whiskey, and you'll get exactly that.
And the book is full of such stories, at least 250, 300 of it.
Yeah, there are hundreds of stories
remember all
like
of
this.
it.
Sure.
Could I now request you to read a couple of paragraphs, you reference to that chapter, from the essay titled Indianisms, pages 18 to 22.
18 to 22, all right. Yeah, sure, I've got it. Okay, I'm just very conscious of the ticking clock, so I'm not sure how much I can read, but let me come up with a few things. So the way Indians speak the English language is often distinctive, but not necessarily incorrect. Some Indian Englishisms are merely translated from an Indian language. What is your good name is the classic, right? Since all Bengalis, for instance, have a dark naam that they're called by, and a bhalo naam, or good name, for the record. But what is your good name is still the most polite form in any Indian version of the English language for finding out the identity of your interlocutor. Is he your real brother, someone asks? Not to accuse you of having imaginary siblings, but to differentiate this brother from a cousin, who is also referred to as a brother by affectionate Indians. Such cultural assumptions inevitably influence language. The widespread preference for, or at least acceptability of, vegetarianism in India makes Indian English the only language that uses the expression non-veg for meat, fish, and those who consume them. The Indian arranged marriage culture has also had its impact on our local English. Our matrimonial ads have created their own cultural tropes, which expressions that only mean something in Indian English. Wheatish complexion, of course. And better still, traditional with modern outlook. Many ads require a prospective bride in India to be homely. In the West, homely means rather not good-looking. It means, unattractive, plain. But in India, of course, it means home-loving and a good housekeeper. And of course, the ads also require to have passed out, not fainted or lost consciousness, as a Brit or an American might assume, but graduated from a convent school. In other words, a school established by a missionary order where the medium of instruction is English. Some Indianisms are creative uses of an ordinary English word or phrase to reflect a particularly Indian sensibility, such as kindly adjust, said apologetically by the seventh person slipping onto a bench meant for three. We have nothing to apologize about. We should defiantly celebrate their use as integral parts of our Indian English vocabulary. After all, we are like that only. And if you don't like it, kindly adjust.
Fantastic. You also write about words that don't exist in English, or and despite an exhaustive vocabulary, English is around 75,000 words.
Yeah, I mean, there are, I mean, Scrabble allows something like 250,000 words. So, I mean, there are an amazing number of words in the English language, far more than exist in many other
could you please illustrate with a few examples? What are those words that don't exist in English? And what does it take for a word to worm its way into English?
Well, I mean, the latter I can't really tell you. It's just usage. I think if people use a word enough from a foreign language, it'll slip into English. And of course, you can understand why Old French got in a lot, because the Normans conquered England, and French, of course, was a language from the people nearest around. But you could argue that that usage is very difficult to say. I'll read you, if I may, then a couple of words. I actually begin the chapter with a Malayalam word. You have to read the book to get that. But let me give you a word, because since this is, after all, a Lit for Life festival, let me give you a couple of literary ones. In Swedish, lagom, and I may be pronouncing it wrong, refers to when something is just the right amount. You don't specify the number, but you convey its exactitude. In Sweden, lagom also represents the idea of living a balanced life. Enough in English doesn't measure up to lagom. Maybe just right comes closer, but it still doesn't convey everything the word connotes. Just enough to satisfy my needs and leave me contented. The Swedes' Scandinavian neighbors, the Danes, have gone farther with the word hygge. It seems it combines coziness, comfort, well-being, and contentment in one word. It's meant to convey a strong feeling of comfort, security, reassurance, familiarity, and even kinship. When you're among loved ones, you have a feeling of hygge. But when things are not right and you can't properly express it, you have to turn to Russian for toska. As Vladimir Nabokov, the famous novelist, explained, no single word in English renders all the shades of toska. At its deepest and most painful, it is a sensation of great spiritual anguish, often without any specific cause. At less morbid levels, it is a dull ache of the soul, a longing with nothing to long for, a sick pining. In English, you could try melancholia, but Russians swear that doesn't go far enough, because toska is an inexplicable sadness, undirected at anyone or anything in particular, and implies a feeling of deep longing or wistful sadness without any coherent reason. And then the Portuguese have something similar, but even further, called saudade, but I will leave that for you to read the book.
Thank you. So chapter 24 is titled Disputed Word Origins, and you conclude the chapter thus: I love these stories, though they are so much more enjoyable than the prosaic truth. May I request you to share a couple of disputed word origin stories?
The best known sort of fake story about a word origin is probably the word sandwich. Most of you have come across the anecdote of how the name came into being because the Earl of Sandwich was an inveterate gambler who couldn't bear to get up from the card table, so he would send his servants to come and bring him a piece of meat between two pieces of bread and eat that at the table without missing a game. And the bread also prevented his hands from getting greasy by eating the meat, and therefore that's the role it played, and so the meal was named after him. That's the story. It's a great story, actually, but the truth is apparently that the word sandwich was in existence for a long time before the Earl of Sandwich was around and played any card games. Similarly, the expression bug, for like a computer software glitch or whatever is called a bug, again, there's an origin story. If you Google it, you'll find that there was a Mark II computer at Harvard University in 1947 that started malfunctioning, and they dug into it, and they found a moth had wandered into the system and died there. And this story was popularized by the female naval admiral in charge of the Mark II project, Grace Hopper, and so that's how the thing came about. But it turned out that in fact the word bug for a glitch in any machine actually went back to the 19th century when there are references in print to bugs in Thomas Edison's phonograph that prevented it from working. But yet all the computer mavens only know the modern story. So there are lots of stories like this. I tell the stories because they're fun stories to know, but then none of them are actually true. There's one about the origin of marmalade that I used to enjoy, which sort of feverish Queen Mary had asked about what this fruit, this particular sweet thing that she had to eat was called. And then she was lying in bed in a fever, and she heard the maids around her whispering in French to each other, Madame est malade. And she heard marmalade and thought that must be the name of the thing, and that's a marmalade. So you've got stories like that. That's probably more stories than you want to digest today.
Outside of disputed word origins, sometimes you could have disputed word creators. For instance, for a very long time you believed you had invented the word prepone, isn't it? Yeah. And when did you discover it had been used much before you bought it?
Much before, yeah. You want to tell that story? Oh, well, you know, I remember in college, I used to write pretty much in every English language magazine or newspaper I could send articles to, and I came up with the word prepone because I thought to advance an appointment seemed a very awkward way of saying it. What does it really mean? Well, if you have postpone, why can't you have prepone? So I started using it, and I was very gratified to find the word sort of getting into popular usage, and I thought, you know, maybe I've invented an English word. And then I got, when this theory, immodest though it was, entered print somewhere, I got a very polite letter from the Oxford English Dictionary saying they'd actually found a usage in a letter to the New York Times in 1911, or something like that. Now, it didn't actually stick in the West. No one actually says prepone in the West, but it did stick in India. So I think even if I can't claim any credit for it, we in India can say it's a good piece of Indian English, okay? Now, mind you, we never prepone anything. We're always postponing things because we're running late. That's another story.
So in the chapter on phobias, and it's a lovely chapter, you mention a 35-letter long word that means the fear of long words. Yeah. What's that word? How does one pronounce it? How does one remember it?
It's actually a made-up word. It's not made up by me, but by someone else some years ago, and it's now entered the language as a recognized word. It's hippopotomonstrosesquipedalophobia. And that means the fear of long words, but it was clearly made up. I mean, hippopoto, you know, large, fat animal, right? Monstrous. And sesquipedalophobia, you see, ped implies feet. So centipede has 100 feet, a millipede has 1,000 feet, and so on. Sesquipede is many feet, so many syllables, many sounds. And phobia, as you know, is fear, or even hatred, but mainly fear of something. So when you put them all together, you get a fear of large, monstrous, polysyllabic words. And that's hippopotomonstrosesquipedalophobia. That's what it is.
So for lesser mortals like us, me and many others in the audience, it only reinforces our fear of long words. So if you were to take a stab at creation and invent a shorter word on the stage, what would your word be for the fear of long words?
I'm afraid you've made that you've asked that question now, but somebody asked me a similar question at the Pune Literary Festival, and I came up with a word that I'm rather fond of, so I'd love to share with you. English borrows from various root languages, right? So Latin, Greek, but also from various Indian languages. Some of you may remember my acerbic comment in an era of darkness that the British had taken the word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits when they came to India. It is of Indian origin. So similarly, I thought I was specifically asked, can you come up with a word to describe a sort of a kindred spirit, a soulmate who's not necessarily a romantic partner, just a friend you feel you've got a soul connection to. And I thought, why not take a word from Sanskrit and a word from French and put them together? Atma from Sanskrit, ami from French, which means friend, and a soul friend becomes an atmami. So I offer it to you. It may, perhaps, if you use it often enough, might actually spread, and we might have Atmamis all over thanking you for calling them that.
You have a lovely chapter on literary insults and, lovely tools to have. And I really liked one of the masters in this art form, Virginia Woolf. So could I ask you to read a couple of passages from pages 164 and 165?
Okay, yeah. I mean, the literary insults, I will, if you, with your permission, end with the really classic ones from famous writers, because those are the ones that stick in the mind as literary. But anyway, the fact is that Virginia Woolf, who, as you all know, was a very famous writer, particularly around the 1920s, early 30s, she kept a diary, and it was full of insults about other writers. Pale, marmoreal T.S. Eliot was there last week, like a chapped office boy on a high stool with a cold in his head, you know. She wrote about Catherine Mansfield, another author. Her mind is a very thin soil laid an inch or two deep upon very barren rock. Nor did she think very highly of James Joyce's masterwork, Ulysses. I think Abraham Varghese might applaud after having told us what he didn't think of Finnegan's Wake. But anyway, she describes Ulysses as follows: an illiterate, underbred book, it seems to me, the book of a self-taught working man, and we all know how distressing they are, how egotistic, insistent, raw, striking, and ultimately nauseating. You wouldn't want to cross Virginia Woolf, would you? I mean, this is... But anyway, the famous ones are really worth mentioning, because, you know, I say that, you know, literary insults, the classic one, of course, is Shakespeare. Graziano speaks an infinite deal of nothing, said the Shakespeare character. Charles Dickens wrote of another character, he would make a lovely corpse. George Orwell dismissed another. He is simply a hole in the air. An Ernest Hemingway character says, I misjudged you. You're not a moron. You're only a case of arrested development. Agatha Christie is the politest of the lot. If you will forgive me for being personal, I do not like your face. But the prize still goes to Shakespeare. I desire that we be better strangers. So much better than unfriending an ex today.
Wonderful. We seem to be doing okay on time. We have a few minutes left on the clock. But you have an entire chapter titled "It's Okay."
Oh yeah.
So could you please share with us the origin story of what arguably is the most widely recognized English word in the world?
Yeah, it is the most widely recognized English word in the world. It's also an English word that was the first human word uttered on the moon. So okay has quite a pedigree, but in fact, there are lots of disputes about the origins of the word, and I found describing one. There actually is a book by a philologist, an entire book, a guy called Alan Metcalf, who actually describes why okay is okay and how it came about. And it's really quite interesting because, you know, there have been language fights. This is, again, an Americanism, as you all know. And there are 100 theories, literally over 100 theories as to what okay actually stands for. The real story is, and as I said, this man has done such detailed research, extensively footnoted, dated, and so on. So he's totally, I think, he has the last word on the subject. What happened was that there used to be an American fad in the newspapers in roughly the 1820s, 30s, 40s of jokey wrong spellings. A whole bunch of acronyms were made up from misspelled words. Deliberately. So there was a particular story. I'm summarizing the chapter because I know it'll be too tedious to go into all the examples and details, but there's plenty in it. So there was an article written by a Boston newspaper editor about a bunch of rumbustious lads, and he spelled all correct, not as A-L-L-C-O-R-R-E-C-T, but O-R-L-K-O-R-R-E-C-T. So all correct, and reduce that to okay. Now, as the book demonstrates, there were about 20 such similar fake acronyms, and none of them have stuck in the English language. Why did OK stick? Because in the elections of 1840, the presidential candidate Martin Van Buren was known from the place he was born in and lived in New York as Old Kinderhook, which is abbreviated to OK for short. And the entire campaign was about voting for OK, and it was OK to vote for OK, and so on. And that made the word the initial stick in people's minds, and then it got frequently used. Which means that it's not correct to spell OK, O-K-A-Y, or as President Woodrow Wilson did, to spell it O-K-E-H, because he was erroneously told that it actually came from a Choctaw Indian word, which the American whites had taken when they conquered the Choctaw. All that apparently is not true. It comes from this jokey Bostonian expression. But anyway, I've told the story briefly so you know the answer to Navaneeth's question, but the chapter is more fun than that.
You have a chapter dedicated to P.G. Wodehouse.
Yeah.
Is this a hat tip? And would you like to read a couple of paragraphs from this chapter? Page
If you like, I mean,
364.
everyone who follows my writing knows I'm a huge fanatic about P.G. Wodehouse. I really think he's an amazing, amazing writer and has done such marvels for the English language. By the way, he's also invented more words than any other writer bar Shakespeare. We use Woodhouseianisms without even realizing he made them up. For example, if you just say we'll go 50-50 on a deal, that's a Woodhouseianism. No one said 50-50 before Woodhouse came up with it. Oh, let's have a cuppa, a C-U-P-P-A is a very common British expression. Woodhouse made it up. So, I mean, he not only was a great comic stylist and a master of convoluted plots and the funniest writer to grace the English language, he also actually came up with a remarkable number, 1,756 quotations from Woodhouse in the Oxford English Dictionary. So his most famous, by the way, is, I'll read you the actual sentence, from his brilliant The Code of the Woosters. He spoke with a certain what is it in his voice, and I could see that, if not actually disgruntled, he was far from being gruntled. Now, the word disgruntled had never had an antonym before, but here's a mock-serious adjective meaning satisfied or contented. Woodhouse's upper-class idlers, members of the Drones Club, were all steeped in alcohol, but the author did not describe them merely as inebriated or drunk. In his 1927 book, Meet Mr. Mulliner, he'd anticipated so many words for drunk. Intoxicated? The word did not express it by a mile, he says about a character. He was oiled, boiled, fried, whiffled, sozzled, and blotto. His character's lexicon for those who've consumed too much fire liquid also included awash, lathered, illuminated, ossified, pie-eyed, polluted, primed, scrooched, stinko, squiffy, tanked, and woozled. Now, these are all Woodhouseian synonyms for alcohol. But anyway, again, I think part of the joy of reading Woodhouse has to be enjoying it in context and enjoying it on the printed word. So maybe I won't overdo that.
So last year we ended your session with the Pirosh letter.
Did we really?
Yeah, we did, but the newer members of the audience, and I think the way you read that is worth.
Oh.
So could we end before we go to audience questions with the reading of the Pirosh letter? And if you could set the context to it.
Okay, I will. It actually begins with the very first question Navaneeth asked me. This is how the paragraph begins. I'm besotted with words. It's fair to say that I love them. But even I could not have expressed my love for words as well as a young job seeker called Robert Pirosh did in 1934 when he headed to Hollywood looking for a new career as a screenwriter. Pirosh was working in advertising in New York and had no connections in the American film industry. But he collected the names and addresses of as many directors, producers, and studio executives as he could find. And he sent them this brilliant letter. Dear sir, I like words. I like fat, buttery words such as ooze, turpitude, glutinous, toady. I like solemn, angular, creaky words such as straight-laced, cantankerous, pecunious, valedictory. I like spurious, black-is-white words such as mortician, liquidate, tonsorial, demimonde. I like suave V words such as Svengali, svelte, bravura, verve. I like crunchy, brittle, crackly words such as splinter, grapple, jostle, crusty. I like sullen, crabbed, scowling words such as skulk, glower, scabby, churl. I like, oh heavens, my gracious land's sake, words such as tricksy, trucker, genteel, horrid. I like elegant, flowery words such as estivate, peregrinate, elysium, halcyon. I like wormy, squirmy, mealy words such as crawl, blubber, squeal, drip. I like sniggly, chuckling words such as cowlick, girlick, girdle, burble, bubble, and burp. I like the word screenwriter better than copywriter. So I decided to quit my job in New York, in a New York advertising agency, and try my luck in Hollywood. But before taking the plunge, I went to Europe for a year of study, contemplation, and horsing around. I have just returned, and I still like words. May I have a few with you?
Thanks.
Many would concede that no better job application has ever been written in the English language, and I would add no better peen to the marvels and joys of words either. The letter worked. Pirosh landed 3 job interviews, one of which led to a job as a junior writer at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the fabled MGM studio. His career soared, and in 1949, screenwriter Robert Pirosh won an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for his work on the war film Battleground. A few months after the Oscar, he'd also won a Golden Globe Award from the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. These were opportunities he might never have landed if he had not loved words enough to craft such a brilliant letter. And I actually go on to define and explain the words for you if you're interested.
While Pirosh wrote a lovely letter, Dr. Tharoor, I'm fairly certain even he couldn't have read it this well.
Oh,
so, thanks. Somebody needs to tell me when the time for questions ends, and
well, you pick the questioners.
Yeah, we can take a few questions from the audience. Yes. Good. I can see some raised hands there. Could somebody get a mic?
There's a hand right
please?
there.
Yeah.
There's a hand right there, but there's a hand there too. Yeah.
There's a person here with the mic.
What's the meaning of the word?
It's on. Oh, my bad. Hi, I'm in the balcony here.
Can't hear you, ma'am. Sorry.
In the balcony. Up in the balcony.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, hi.
If you have the mic, you have the advantage. Shoot.
Yeah, I have the higher ground here for Star Wars fans. But yeah. So it's a 3-part question. I'll try to keep it short as possible. You spoke about how words come into the English language because of popular usage. And do you think that is a reflection of lawmaking itself? Or is that practice a reflection of a lawful society? That is one. I would like to know your comment on that. Because do you also believe that if a practice is followed by a few people or lots of people, it becomes a law timely, right? So do you think that is a reflection of how words enter English also?
Well, the short answer very simply is that English actually doesn't have a lawmaking body. The French do, the Académie Française. But in English, it's just usage that matters. And so if something is used often enough, the dictionary makers will start putting it in because people are curious as to what the expression means. And so what essentially happens is that words enter the language in English essentially through usage being wide enough to generate acceptance. That's really all there is. There is no formal body. There might be a word that the Oxford English Dictionary admits that the Collins Dictionary does not admit, or Merriam-Webster in America uses it, but the English in England don't. I mean, all sorts of things like that happen, and there are increasing variations. But the truth is that that it's always governed by usage. And usually the yardstick for these dictionary makers is, are there enough usages of the word, enough citations to justify incorporating it? That's all. And it's done by dictionary makers, not by any law-giving body or academy.
Right. But do you believe the opposite is true for the lawmaking body also?
Could we take questions
Yeah,
from
no
more
problem,
members
no
of the
problem.
audience? Yeah.
No, you can't create words by law, by fiat. I really think you can't. The French, for example, tried all the time. They banned the French from saying le weekend because that was of English origin. They want them to say la fin de semaine. But 90% of French still say see you le weekend, you know. And so that happened. You can't invent and change and shape language easily by laws. Yeah.
So that mic works. Please go ahead.
Whoever's got the mic should go ahead, otherwise it
Can I-
won't work.
Sir, as you said, most of the time when Westerns follow certain things, Western uses some phrases, it catches the world very easily. Same way, we have a good tradition as an Indians. Our thought process, our phrases might have reached the world. Can you enumerate certain things? Because you are the right person to talk about all those things. Certain phrases which catches the world from India.
Sir, I didn't quite get your question. You mean words that English has that's come from Indian origin? Is that what
Yes,
you-
of course.
Yeah, well, there are many, many such examples. I mean, the one that comes from Tamil Nadu, for example, is mulligatawny, has become mulligatawny soup. And everyone assumes because there's an Irish name called Mulligan that it must come from some Irishman called Mulligan and some Irishman called Tony, and that's where mulligatawny comes. It's actually mulligatawny, which is actually rasam, but which has become a synonym for a spicy beef broth in England. Loot is another Indian word. Thug, as they pronounce it, which is tug, of course, in Hindi, came from the actual thugs in our country. If you go to Central Park and somebody holds you up with that 6 gun, asking you not for a shot of whiskey, but your wallet, you're being mugged. That comes from the Hindi word mugger, a crocodile. The guy is being a crocodile and threatening you in the park. And so on and so forth. The obvious words like jungle, bungalow, and so on, which are close enough to the Indian originals. But there are many others that are not so obvious, and I'll end with one more example, shampoo. Shampoo is actually from the imperative form of the word champna in Hindi, and the English only learned the imperative because they were busy ordering people when they spoke Hindi. So they said champo, which means press my head, wash my hair and press my head. And that champo, which means to knead, K-N-E-A-D, that became shampoo. And that's how the word shampoo entered the English language. It's from Hindi.
Oh, great, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Sir,
much.
I have a
and,
question.
And one more thing. Rasa,
So many hands are up. One question.
One
per
question
person.
from there, please. Yeah.
Yes, I'm here in the balcony, sir.
I'll come to you after
I'm
this.
Katyayani.
Hi.
Pleasure to interact with you.
Thank you.
So you had given us examples from Swedish, such as lagom and hugga.
Hugga is Danish, yeah.
Right. So they were words that English kind of falls short of representing. But I want to go and reverse engineer this question, where you kind of look at a lot of Indian regional languages and words that come from them, which not only does English fall short of representing them, it also goes to an extent of kind of misrepresenting them. For example, let's take the word punya or punyam, which exists in a lot of Indian languages, but there is simply no equivalent in English. And this is because the Indian languages are trying to be anglicized when they are written. So what are your thoughts on this? And
Absolutely. No, in fact, I don't know enough Indian languages well enough to write authoritatively on that. And I doubt there are very many Indians who could, but we could get a collection of different people from different parts of our country. Putting that together would be a terrific idea. The example I used is the Malayalam word etramate, which means which number position in a line is that. So if you go to a rental car company and there are 20 cars and you want to know which is your car, in Malayalam, one word's enough. Etramate vandiya. Okay, but in English there is no such word. You have to say which particular car is mine in that order and that row, and somebody would have to say, well, it's the 7th car in the row with the red roof or whatever. In Malayalam, one word is enough. So I suggested that we should create an English word, maybe wet. Wet car is mine.
thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am, here. Please.
There's no mic there. Can somebody relay her question closer? Because we're really running out of time, I'm afraid.
Hello, sir. Greetings.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm in the balcony above.
Go on. Whoever has the mic should just speak.
Yes, sir. Is there a way somehow a word can die?
I didn't get the question, did you?
Is there a way somehow a word can...
Yes. I've got many examples in the book of words that simply died out. The people, for example, come up with words and people just stop using them. Sometimes words can be revived. In fact, there is a question, for example, what happens to the word tweet? Because it came from Twitter, but the word Twitter is no longer there because the company is now renamed X. And so when I tell people I'm tweeting, I'm using a word which strictly speaking means nothing because I'm Xing actually. But the truth is, so will the word tweet die or will it stubbornly stick in the language because we've all used it for so long? In the chapter on literary insults that Navaneeth was quoting from, there's the word cockwomble, which is a wonderfully insulting word for somebody who says stupid, pointless, irritating, wrong things, but is so self-important and so convinced of his own greatness and his own accuracy that he doesn't realize what he's saying is stupid and people are not respecting it. So he's a cockwomble. Now that goes back to the 17th century, but for 300 years no one used it. Now in the WhatsApp era, people are again using it for their least favorite political leaders and sending it around on WhatsApp. So maybe it will come back, who knows?
Okay, so that's all we have time for today. Dr. Tharoor, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for these great questions.